Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Let's go.
Welcome to the Life of Phys Podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Martin. On this episode, I have Ansley Stewart. Ansley is a Houston, Texas-based photographer who is drawn to the lonely places in an attempt to grab images of sites fighting the battle against time. Being surrounded by endless miles of concrete, smog, and sound, the first time he stood on the face of a cliff overlooking the minuscule river far down in the valley, his perspective shifted. Ansley called me a few weeks ago excited to tell me about the box of Kodachrome slides he found at an estate sale. He has been scanning and digitizing all of them with, yes, a Leica M11 and an adapted macro lens. Ansley and his wife have been painstakingly researching the history of the people and moments captured in these images, from the owner being in the Texas Women's Hall of Fame, to family outings, to Baylor University basketball and the airplane trip to the Final Four game at Madison Square Garden in either 1948 or 1949, as well as moments captured at a half-built Baylor University football stadium in a game against Texas A&M, to the moments where the serial killer Candyman, Dean Corll, buried his victims. I was so excited to hear about this project, I had to have my close friend Ansley back on to talk about it, and you can hear by the passion in his voice that this project is near and dear to his heart. His end goal is to digitize the collection, preserve history, and get the collection back into the hands of the family. Now let's hear a word from our podcast sponsor and get to the show. The Life of Phys Podcast is lit by Harlow. Harlow is on a mission to empower creators to elevate their creativity with lighting kits made to last and built to inspire. These lights are bold, beautiful, and powerful because Harlow believes that your lights deserve to be seen. To learn more, follow them on Instagram at Harlow Creators or online at www.harlow.com, and don't forget to use our discount code Tyson10 to save 10% on your order. All right, so we're back. We're back with my brother from Texas, the guy with all the snow, Ansley Stewart. He's got a new project. He gave me a text and a phone call a couple of weeks ago. We talked about it. He found some old slides of Kodachrome. So why don't you tell us what your plan is with all this Kodachrome you found and how you're going to preserve it?
Sure. I was told that apparently 6 hours wasn't enough, so I figured I'd add another hour onto that. And yeah, I guess since the last time I happened upon a collection of old Kodachrome slides, and I don't think that that's too different. But looking through them, it kind of turned out to be this like one collection from this singular family and their like extended friends. And as I'm like going through it and scanning and all this kind of stuff, I had originally just wanted to explore the Kodachrome slides because it's Kodachrome. And looking at the slide mounts, it was obvious that they were from like the mid to late 40s. So, and there's like 500 of those slides in this like little metal box, I had already kind of started down the rabbit hole of scanning my own film. So it was sort of a make sense. Like, oh, you already kind of wanted to go down this anyways. Why don't you use the setup to scan all of these old slides and see what comes to life, And what I would find is as I'm scanning through these slides, I'm looking at things and it's starting to kind of like send off little suggestions of like, oh, this is a historical event, right? And so you start looking at little like little miniature handwritten notes that are on these slides and going, okay, well, where did this estate come from? Who's the owner of the estate? Started backtracking all of this and end up building out, after scanning through all of them and making notes and lots of Googling, what I would figure out is the slide collection basically spanned a time frame of roughly late 1946, early 1947 to around 1953. I think that there were 3 photographers, because I think it was the husband, the wife, and the son that were photographing in this time. And I think they were kind of like trading off. But this family and their friends, they did a bunch of, I don't know, it's hard to describe without like having the photos on hand, like looking at them. But, you know, you see a bunch of this stuff from promotions to people getting married and their first dates, and college graduations and high school graduations and graduation parties and first kids being born, and you know, the neighbors' kids that their kids used to interact with, and all this kind of stuff, weddings. And then I realized that the person that we got the Kodachrome collection from, the state that it came from, this woman was in the Texas Women's Hall of Fame. She was on women's rights boards and councils, and was extraordinarily well known. I mean, this is a woman that's on the Texas Women's Hall of Fame. Like, there's astronauts on that Hall of Fame, right? But not even just her. Her kids would go on to be really well-known, like cardiologists and attorneys that furthered Texas history, but also like their personal histories. Like their friends all kind of did cool stuff too. And it, not only was it cool to see a collection of Kodachrome from that time period that was fairly well preserved, right? But understand that you're holding little snippets of history that you can't replicate, but you can certainly learn from. You can take context clues of. And then when I built out the entire family tree, or, you know, when my wife and myself built out this family tree, everybody was dead. And you realize that you're looking at these photos of ghosts, but you're finding their obituary photos now. And then you will go back and look at photos of them on their wedding day. And it became very clear that, like, that person never changed. You know what I mean? You'd read their, I can't overstate like how deep of a dive we did to build out that family tree, because some of the friends that were involved in those pictures, like, there were no names ever mentioned. But what you would find is, like, digging through like the legacy.coms and the find a graves and the ancestry.coms, when you're building out those family trees, you will see, you discover like the grandkid of the friend that you saw in the photo writing a condolence message to the person that had passed, referencing who they were. And you kind of went, I wonder if that's that person in that photo. And so then you start Googling and looking at finding old photos and their obituary photos, and you're like, that's absolutely that person. And so then you went down, like, we would go down this rabbit hole of, like, because some people were just named by nicknames, right? So, like, what is, there was this one little kid, he was 2 or 3 in the photos, but they were some of the most vibrant of the Kodachrome slides from, I think they were like 1948 or 1949, but it was with a puppy, right? And it's this little 2-year-old little boy in the grass with this like golden Cocker Spaniel puppy. And all it is like little Addo on the back, like ADO. I'm like, what is Addo Ado or Addo a nickname for? Is that a name? Well, it can be a nickname for Adolf. Probably isn't that, considering the time frame that we're looking at. What, turns out it's Edward. Addo is a nickname for Edward. So then you kind of go down, like start looking through like other condolence messages, right? Oh, blah, blah, blah. I was yada yada's next door neighbor and we all used to play together. Oh, his name is Edward Addo Stevens III. Now I found his dad and his mom and little Addo and other photos. And you're like, so here's his dad's obituary. Here's his mom's obituary. You know what I mean? Like, that's all to say. This project that I think that I kind of came up with, there's a lot of history in those slides, right? A fair amount of the people in the slides went to Baylor University down here in Texas, in Waco. But like, one of the friends was on the Baylor basketball team in the 40s, like the late 40s, and played in the Final Four at Madison Square Garden in 1948 or 1949. And there's these photos in these Kodachrome slides of like everybody in what is what commercial flight wasn't a big deal back then, but what they did have was like the idea of commercial flight was emerging. So they had a bunch of bombers that they were like, we can convert these. And that's what they would do to some degree, right? So there's these photos of family members and friends and stuff flying back from New York City on a gutted bomber that has like just seats, sort of like jump seats strapped to the side of the fuselage, the inside of the fuselage, holding up a newspaper because Baylor got beat in that game, right? There's photos of the woman in question, Texas Women's Hall of Fame, holding her firstborn daughter, or firstborn, which was a daughter. Her name was Elaine. They would go on to have 4 kids in total. But the first thing that I pulled up is Elaine's obituary. And so I've got this obituary photo of Elaine. And then I have the 3 generations of the women holding the baby in the hospital. And because we've got so much access to historical information and all that kind of stuff, you're able to piece together this kid's life as they turned into an adult and what they did. The dad, I'm relatively certain that the main photographer was a man named Meredith and his wife, Lucille, right? Context clues. There's a bunch of pictures of what a lot of people see as mundane stuff, right? It's like family Christmases and Thanksgivings and stuff. So they're all around a table. But there's always somebody missing and the chair is pulled out. And then you go down and see that there's another photo from a different angle, but that chair isn't pulled out and this person is sitting there. Because there's never credit on these photos. People weren't taking photos like they were, we're going to do bangers. Like they were just figuring out, like, because Kodachrome is like the first color film, right? And to a large degree, Kodachrome was not cheap. So the collections that still exist were very much from like more privileged financial foundation of families. If I remember right, and I may be wrong about this, I think Kodachrome was like $25 a roll or something at that point in time, because it predates the DOJ suing Kodak for Sherman antitrust violations. Because essentially back then, if you shot Kodachrome, the price that you paid for it included shipping it back, the development, and the mounting of the slides. And so Kodak basically held a monopoly over processing their film. And it wouldn't be until the mid 1950s, I think it was like 56 or 7, something like that, that the Fed got involved and went, no, that's anti-competitive. You can't have a monopoly. You have to give people the option. So there's a lot of consistency to those slides and slide collections that come up to that time, but they were also really expensive, especially if you adjust for like inflationary, I bought 10 sacks of potatoes and 2 loaves of bread and walked to the movies and I've spent half a penny, like that sort of thing, right? So if you adjust that for how expensive Kodachrome was back then, you start whittling down the available collections because financially it just wasn't. And so you're like, well, what did this person do? What was their job? Like blah, 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 blah. Dude was a president of a bread bakery and got a promotion right around the time that most of the slides came to be. And so you see in the collection this house that you're like, damn, like for the 40s, like it looks like a mid-mod, like a Frank Lloyd Wright house, but it was in its like, it was fresh. The concrete on the driveway was nice and white and like gray and stuff like that, right? And you could tell that these are people that were like figuring out how to take photos. Like, because, what cameras were they using? Well, you can start to deduce context clues from that too, because a lot of them were with external flash. The ones that had natural light were markedly worse than the flash photos. What cameras were popular back then? How were people using these? Like that kind of thing. Oh, it's because they had limited shutter speeds. Kodachrome back then was like ASA 12. So there wasn't, but it also had a giant, like compared to now and Ektachrome, there's that stigma with slide film that it doesn't have a whole lot of latitude, right? But Kodachrome was notoriously not like that. The Steve McMurrays of the world, like the pros thought process with Ektachrome or with the slide film was they shot it a third of a stop underexposed, right? But then a lot of them would push it. At that point, they would push process the Kodachrome to get that like signature, the Kodachrome look that we know from National Geographic and Afghan Girl and all that kind of stuff, right? And you kind of see this in non-professional photographers. So being someone that's like really into film photography and like we've got crazy ISO and crazy sensitivity to film and super fast lenses and all this stuff, it's like that person was shooting on like an f6 on a flip down camera that ISO 12 and just kind of like it's not even like f8 and B there. It's just sort of like, I hope this comes out. Right?
You mean that's not normal? I do that with every photo I take.
It's a little bit different when you're ISO 12.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean? Especially because but again, that you'd see these captures and you start to see like trends emerge, right? You see that there's certain trends from different photos. And then you're kind of like piecing back, like, well, who is in this photo and who is not? So who's the better photographer? Because I think that there's at least a couple of them, right? What would come to pass to understand is like building out the family tree. The woman that the photos came from the estate of, her name is Liz, or was Liz. She kind of like outsurvived everyone, other than her youngest daughter, who is still alive, apparently. As of a couple of months ago, is still alive. Questionable, I guess now. Anything can happen. But one of the questions we had is like, I can't find any obituary that talking about Liz speaks of her husband. Was she married? She had kids, right? then you kind of like backtrace through these slides and you figure out that the husband died in 1988, died of a heart attack in his like 50s, right? Their son only outlived his dad in age by 10 years, was a cardiologist and an art connoisseur, and died from a heart attack running a charity marathon. And in those comments were from the EMTs that helped him that day, talking about how great of a kid how great of a person he was from being able to help him in his last moments. Right? That dude was a general sales manager for a bread bakery. You know what I mean? Like, there's this like crazy spider web of history and stories, and it's all right there if you just pay attention, right? And so this kind of starts this path of, well, now I want to buy all the slides, right? And you start talking to like these estate sale, the people that run the estate sale, right? The proprietors of them. And they're just like, nobody ever buys these things. Why do you want them? Like, I've looked at a couple of them and they're just like family vacations and this, that. And I'm like, yeah, that's there too. But if you pay attention, they captured like legit moments in time. Some of these things are very historical. And the guy is just like, some of the proprietors are like, well, give me your number. I'll sell you all the slides, because they never sell at the estate sales. And I'm like, totally. I got my plug. Right into my veins. I'm going to chase this dragon until it Kurt Cobains me. Like, right? But at that same estate sale, we bought a collection of more slides that this dude was like, oh yeah, and I can never sell them, and they're not really interested in this, that, and the other. For I think $10, 600 more slides or something like that, right? This was a newer collection. Kodachrome 2 kind of sucks. Once other companies got involved in producing slide film, most of those sucked too. If they're stored improperly, they just turn into pink. They look like aerochrome. So you'll get this like box and you'll look and you'll like, you see pink slides and you're like, fuck yeah, aerochrome. No. It's just burned out like Kodachrome 2, right? But not all of them are like that. And yes, there are, family photos and this, that, and the other, and just sort of like innocuous whatevers. But in that same slide collection, for those of you listening that pay attention to true crime or like really into the murder docs or anything, and or have ever heard of the horror movie Candyman and the subsequent series, you'll know that the Candyman movie was based off of a real serial killer here in Houston, Texas. At the time, he was the most prolific serial killer in all of history. It ended up being that they found right under 30 bodies. And he had an accomplice, or he had two accomplices, but they were all teenage boys, right? The serial killer's name was Dean Corll. If you get really into the weeds about that, there are conspiracy theories that say that Dean Corll and John Wayne Gacy are connected, and that the reason why they were serial killers is because they were part of this like Fredophile young boy, you get the idea, like trafficking, right? And that they were connected because Dean Corll hid and buried his victims in shallow graves in like a boat warehouse and stuff like that, right? But we don't actually know the extent of what Dean Corll did because his accomplice shot and killed him. That is how they found out what Dean Corll had been doing. Because the accomplice, after shooting Dean Corll and killing him, went, I was doing it in self-defense. This is what was happening. Oh, and if you don't believe me, I'll show you the bodies. Right? It's said that John Wayne Gacy took quote unquote inspiration from that. And that's why he buried his victims in his crawl space, covering them with lime. Because that's how they found Dean Corll's victims. They were in a boat warehouse in a dirt floor, stacked on top of each other with layers of lime separating them. But that's not the only place that he buried victims. It would come out that the accomplice that shot Dean Corll, he came in at a certain time point of Dean Corll's serial killing. And so all of the bodies that he knew where they were, that he was involved in the accomplishing, he showed them. He took them to the boat warehouse. He took them to the National Forest, which is like 45 to an hour away north of where we are. Because mind you, I grew up in the same neighborhood as Dean Corll victimized, right? One of the houses that he used to source his victims was on the other side of the fence of the high school that I graduated from.
What a crazy coincidence, like when you start piecing it together.
No. My mom had been at Dean Corll's house.
Wow.
But my mom got away because Dean Corll didn't care about killing women. He only wanted to kill young boys. Why Dean Corll gets the name the Candyman is because his parents owned a candy shop in the Heights. Dean Corll worked there. Everybody in the neighborhood liked Dean Corll because Dean Corll gave them candy. So everybody thought that he was personable and nice and kind and all this kind of stuff. And he was sourcing victims. The spear tip of this is in that slide collection of the estate, which the estate proprietor was like, oh yeah, I never see anything. It's just like family vacations, yada, yada, yada. The third location that the accomplice showed and revealed was a beachfront in High Island in Galveston Island, which is 45 minutes away from here or whatever. We're about 60 miles from the coast in Houston. 4 more bodies were buried in the dunes. And in those slides, there are photos of the cops digging up those bodies with the free, quote unquote, labor of the Texas correctional inmates that they took out of the correctional facility and made them dig the holes up. So on these slides, in the midst of, family vacations and whatevers, there's photos of the boat warehouse the day that the bodies were found there. There's photos on the beach, literally standing 15 yards away from the holes. Because back then, like, the cops didn't make, like, if you were to Google videos of that stuff back then, that event, people were like right up on the cops. Like the news crews were like right there. And once the word got out that now we're finding all of these boys that had literally been missing for years and years and years. This was something that took a very long time to come out, right? There's slides of that day, that event. Cops, inmates digging up corpses, just right there. Police cars, and I'm sure the 2 accomplices, because they went out with the cops. They had to point them out in the dunes where they were, right? Wild. And these are memories and history and stuff that it's macabre, right? And it's dark. But we're just passing it over. We have records of who we were and where we came from. Because also you can start seeing the very disastrous trends of, you're looking at a slide collection. You're like, oh, wow, look, they're at this parade and it's a homecoming and this, that, and the other. And it's like, I feel like people aren't being represented. Why does everybody standing on the street have the same skin color? Weird. Oh, right. You know what I mean? What's contained on a lot of these old photos that are sitting in people's attics and basements, and well, not basements so much in Texas, but in collections in these little metal boxes and stuff, they've been there for nearly 100 years now, and they've recorded all kinds of stuff. And at this point, like, we've got all kinds of technology to be able to bring that history back. And some of the institutions don't even have archives of this stuff. One of the things that was interesting about that came out is there's a series of 4 slides, 3 that are kind of passable, usable. Because this is early on I think these are some slides that just got stored badly, so they're kind of cupped and bowed, and the film itself is a little bit difficult. There's some stuff there, but that can make Kodachrome crack because of its layers. Its development process made it color stable, but very brittle. And if it gets too hot, too humid, the film can basically like cup. And if you put it into something like a slide projector, it'll crack as it slides in. A lot of the times it doesn't crack the entire film through, but it'll crack like 2 layers of the emulsion. So you get this like big black line that looks like a fault line in the photo. But we've got Photoshop. So you just edit the photo and then make it into a couple of different layers and slide them back together like the crack never happened. That's all to say that in that series of photos, it was of a football game. That seems pretty innocuous, right? But then you kind of like look at like what's going on, what teams are here. Oh, that's the Aggies. That's Texas A&M. That's Baylor. That's Baylor's home field. But wait, the stands aren't complete. Like the stadium isn't complete. Why is it not complete? That's weird, right? Then you start like blowing it up in M11 resolution, right? Start looking for stuff on the sidelines, because the vantage point of this photo was taken from high up, like near the announcement box of the home side, so Baylor's side, looking down and to the right across the field, and then down and to the left across the field. So there's kind of a 1, 2, 3 sort of thing. But that third photo is the best one. It is the most in focus. It is the best preserved one. Doesn't have any cracks or any of that kind of stuff. Film is still cupped. Not in the greatest focus because, again, ASA 12, they're shooting in natural light. They didn't get their shutter speed right, so it's kind of blurry, right? But what you see is that on the field, the Aggie marching band is spelling out Baylor, right? And then you look up and you see this big concrete, like half completed concrete stands, empty. This little tiny like bubble of white shirts, which are khaki shirts and uniforms, which are the A&M people. Because at that point, remember, not only were nobody but white people allowed to enroll in A&M, but women weren't allowed to enroll at A&M either. So they had the Corps cadets. They all wore these like, they still wear the same thing, right? It's like a khaki, like all khaki, like almost like a sailor uniform, maybe military or whatever. So you have this like in the middle of the completed stands, this little blob of khaki surrounded by the Baylor white all around them, an empty stand that's half completed, the Corps Cadet Marching Band on the football field spelling out Baylor. And when you look on the sideline, you see 3 white, like white uniformed, like dudes walking down the sideline. And with them, if you look a little bit closer and start zoom in, you see these black blobs that are with them. And you're like, okay, what the hell happened here? And the only note that was on that slide on one of the first ones was Baylor homecoming game. And you went, huh, what is this photo of? Turns out you start doing some backlogging or back tracing. It was the first homecoming game that was ever played at that stadium. They weren't able to complete the stadium on time, which is why it's being played at a half completed stadium. So the attendance of that game was severely constricted because they couldn't fit in like a third of what the capacity of that stadium was supposed to have. But right leading up to that game, the Baylor, their mascot are the Bears. Well, back in that time, it wasn't considered a faux pas to have the actual animal as the mascot, right? They didn't have people in suits. They had the things. But Baylor had transitioned away from having one giant bear pet to a series of bears. A&M, as a homecoming prank, had kidnapped said bears in the week leading up to this homecoming game and tried to keep them in burlap sacks in their dorm rooms.
Smart.
And a couple of those Aggies learned why you don't kidnap actual bears. Grizzly Man could have learned a lesson from this if he had had these Kodachrome slides. He did not. But what those Aggies would learn is that bears don't play, even as cubs. And so a couple of the Aggies that were the kidnapping Aggies got mauled by those bears. And as a result, not only did a couple of them get arrested and go to jail, but they gave the bears back, clearly, to Baylor and we don't want this, right? So you've got A&M, the Corps cadet, spelling out Baylor, and the handlers antagonizing them, walking those same bears in front of them in this half-completed stadium that would go on to be called the Casey Ferris or Ferry Stadium. That stadium has been demolished already. So that first game was 1951, right? These slides outlasted all of that. I went and I looked at Baylor's site. I looked through their archives, their digital archives. They've got no color photos of that stadium in that day, right? And it was just in a random slide collection at an estate that nobody cared about. Because once again, it's just family photos and games and stuff, right? We have so much history at our fingertips. And I almost kind of feel like I am going to try to reach out to that family and the surviving members of the friends family that I can find and see if they have any interest in it. Because, they would be seeing their mom and their grandma and great grandma and stuff, but also colleges and the universities and stuff, because the dichotomy in that photo was really wild if you knew enough. And mind you, I didn't go to college, so I didn't really appreciate how universities and stuff kind of operate and how they line stuff out and their traditions and stuff. I've never been never been part of the in crowd. But the dichotomy in that photo is wild because on the A&M side, all you have is the Corps cadets. You see how limited and how concentrated their student base was versus Baylor that was all inclusive. That not only was, one of the candidates for homecoming queen that year was an exchange student from China, right? Now, mind you, the articles that I found speaking of that event definitely use some not now language, right? but would have made perfect Quentin Tarantino script writing fodder. But you see like history and how it played itself out, and you kind of see like both sides of the coin to a certain degree, because in a couple of those photos, there's like women that aren't white in the frame looking down on this field of a college that was only white dudes. Right? I don't know. I just kind of feel like, one, it's a nice reprieve from taking my own photos, if that actually makes any sense. It's kind of neat to take something that has been, I don't want to say lost, because clearly not, but like, I guess underappreciated, maybe not truly taken for what it is nowadays, and be able to bring some of, photographers back to life. Like, at what point, it's one of the big critiques that I have about, in the creative community, like, oh, they're not a photographer, they only take this thing. It's like, okay, so which photo did you take that somebody would justifiably call you a photographer? Is it photo 1, photo 1000, photo 1 million, right? Because I don't know about you, but most of my early photos, I don't know where the fuck they are. They're on like probably a photo bucket account somewhere that's about to be deleted, versus these Kodachrome slides from nearly 100 years ago that have outlasted buildings and people and family trees and historical events. And like, I feel like they're more of a photographer than I would ever be. They weren't doing it for social clout. They weren't doing it for the bangers. They weren't doing it for like algorithmic, they were doing it because they cared about these people, and they cared about the events, and they cared about the moments, and they had the wherewithal and, admittingly the resources to use that as a conduit of their hobbies. You know what I mean? And a conduit of their care and their warmth, and recording these events that they never thought were going to go anywhere. Right? Like, but there's also this weird serendipity, like Inception worthy, of there is a single slide in the middle of that 500. It's around the mid mark, where one of the daughters of, give some context here. So Meredith and Lucille were the grandparents. I believe that Meredith, he was the president, or he would become the president in the time frame of the slides that I have. He was promoted to the president of a baking company, of a bread bakery, and they moved to San Antonio to live up to that, right? So they got like a new house and all that kind of stuff. So Meredith and Lucille were married. They had 3 children. The son, John, is who would go on to marry Liz, who we got the slides from the estate of, right? But he also had 2 sisters. And in or around the late 1940s, there is a photo of his sister, Dolores, sitting on the floor with a friend of hers who, as we haven't been able to figure out the name of this person because they only appear a couple of times. Looking through the slide collection in the box that we bought.
That's incredible.
And it's only halfway full. So you can see that, like, there was a moment in time that was captured that stuck in the middle of this collection, that slide went, and everything that followed it went into that box. The box got closed, and then it would come into my possession. It could have come into a lot of other people's possession. But it just so happened to come into the possession of a Kodachrome nerd. that wants to play, you know, like Moonlight as a historian at the Smithsonian or something. And like, it was such a wild, it didn't actually register until I scanned it big. Because looking at them on the viewer, they look, slides on a viewer, you understand why Kodachrome was so revered. They look incredible in that little warm viewing light that all the viewers came with back then. And it's one of the things that from a nerd like research study, you start to learn more about why Kodachrome did what it did, why it looked the way that it looked, how best to get in that ballpark without being able to recreate it at this point. But like Kodachrome it wasn't only a daylight balanced film, but the lights that were used in most of the viewers and the slide projectors and stuff, they were also warm tinted. So to get that look, Ektachrome will, like, if you're shooting Ektachrome now or slide film now, it is tinted cooler with the idea that it's going to be viewed through another light somehow, right? So how do you fix that on the front end? Do you want to fix that on the front end? Do you want to burn that into the slide, or do you always want to correct that in digital post, right? If you're going to do that with it. But all that to say, like, there's not only that historical aspect, there's the research capability of understanding kind of the lineage of what would build up to how we understand and why we have such reverence for color photography in the manner of which it was, right? How it evolved to our digital sensors and kind of like the qualities that you see over and over again. Also, I'll tell you something. It will break you down from expectations of really understanding when people talk about, oh, that was just a character lens. It's like, sort of. Part of it is the resolving power and that delta between what high res was back yonder and what high res is now. Because you're sitting there like scanning slides and you're like, it's blurry, it's soft, it's this, that, and the other. And you're just like, no, that's because I scanned a 35 millimeter slide and turned it into a 60 megapixel full res image that's like 4 feet wide at its actual resolution, right? Like I'm looking at things that I should never have been looking at 100% resolution. And I think it starts to, at least for me, it certainly started to evolve my expectations of my own photos, what I felt made them cool, but also giving a much better understanding of, because you're seeing photographers actually become better at their craft back then, right? They're understanding the gear that they're using better. They're understanding external lights better. They're capturing more moments. Their hit rate is going up. And you see repetition slides, which are bracketed photos. A lot of the Kodachrome stuff that you'll see like replicated and digitized and stuff, you're seeing the banger slide of that. You're not seeing the whole contact sheet, but because of the manner of which the collection came in, you're seeing all of the bumpkus ones too. And dude, that's such a cool, like, it's just, I don't know. It's like opening a pop-up book, right? Like, I know that I really liked pop-up books when I was little because like the dinosaurs would come to life. And that's what this feels like to me. It really like ignited this neat curiosity of, in part because I did not have that happy family thing. So there's some voyeuristic, like fly on the wall thing, but being able to connect with it on an artistic and a creative and a photographer level, it kind of like meets all these things. And then after it's all said and done, you have all these files and you're able to build this giant family tree and historical like lineage of where these people went and what did their kids do and what influences did they have and all this kind of stuff. And it started with a dude that like ran a bread bakery that liked photography, and his wife liked photography, and they took selfies or like portraits of each other on the beach, and they took portraits of the important times in life, and they kept them in a box that their kids were able to look at and love and understand, and their kids would do that. And then after it's all said and done, and most of these people have passed, they get passed on to this jackass that goes, whoa, red Kodachrome slides, I wonder, and digitizes them.
But the connections you've made and the history you found, and like you were saying, like Baylor doesn't have images from this time frame.
Right?
Like how fucking amazing is that?
It still kind of boggles a little bit. There's another photo of John, Liz, and Elaine as a baby, like a couple of months old, boarding. I'm pretty sure it's a DC-7 because it's one of those stainless steel, like clad old bomber type planes back then. They were getting on a flight, and there's a photo of them holding the baby. And in the back, you see the tail number of that plane and go, I wonder. I could find no photos of that plane, but you know what I found? Scale model replicas of that exact plane. And there's a Kodachrome slide of John, Liz, firstborn child in front of the tail of this plane that was revered enough and rare enough and a big enough deal back then that scale models are now made of it. But that's its history. I couldn't find more photos of it. I found more photos of the die-cast replicas of it than I found any color like photos or any black and white photos of this airplane. You know what I mean? Like it's those little niblets, like little golden nuggets inside of stuff like that they are kind of mundane and whatever their everyday life. But our everyday life at some point is going to be historical to someone.
And I think that's what, when you told me this story on the phone a couple weeks ago about what you were doing, and we hadn't talked for a couple months because, I was in the hospital and fun shit. But like, even on that phone call, I was getting fucking excited.
Right.
Because hearing you talk about like seeing these Baylor moments or just the tail numbers of a plane that you were able to search out those tail numbers, but you couldn't find any photos. There is like a tangible photo of that plane being used by people, not just a die cast, which is still cool. That just adds another level to it. The serial killer who, if you see me looking away, I've actually been reading about him on the other monitor while we're talking.
Did you find photos of the beach? Because
I haven't got that far. I just was reading his history and I was just like, holy fuck. Yeah. But then the connection, like your mom being at that person's house, one of the houses they used right behind where you went to school, like that becomes a personal connection now. And I don't know, man, I think what you're doing, the fact that you're trying to save moments that are gone, I always call myself a documentarian of moments. That's what I say. If people ask me why I shoot photos, because I want something, I love finding old stuff and being like, man, what's the history?
Yeah.
Right? So hearing the story and what you're doing and how you're preserving images and what you plan to do and bring them out, maybe put them back in the hands in a digitized copy with somebody that's related to that family.
Yeah.
Who has maybe never seen a photo of their great grandma.
Right.
Right. Or that you found a slide in the slides that shows them looking at slides in the box that you purchased that was half full.
It's wild.
It's crazy,
dude. And it's crazy because it's like, I didn't have to push the shutter button at all. Like the digitizing part. Yeah, whatever, I'm taking pictures of pictures. Right. But it's this interesting kind of like crossroads of appreciation for art, appreciation for humanity, appreciation for society, appreciation for history as it was. Because if we forget where we came from and the folly of our past days and stuff, we're only guaranteed to repeat it over and over and over again. Being able to learn from our mistakes, big deal. But the faster our society moves, I was listening to a verbal thesis the other day in regards to, like, why don't we talk about time like we used to? Like, for example, you don't hear people talk about the early 2000s as the aughts. But if I was to say we're gonna have an 80s themed party, you would know exactly how to dress. You know the music, you know the vibe, you know what I mean. If I was to say, man, the 90s were a crazy time, you would know exactly what the fuck I meant. 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, the roaring 20s. We're in the 20s now. We're halfway through the 20s. And do we have significant or specific, other than like when Nickelback came on the scene, like, do we have things that the past 25 years, if I was to say, dude, I'm going to throw a 2000s party, like, are we going to complain about like 9/11 and I don't know, like wear polo shirts with the collars popped? You know what I mean? And like have Smash Mouth just on repeat over and over and over again. It seems like our generations and our kind of time lapse, and not just because we're getting older and our time of reference is being compressed because we've got more of it to look at. The manner of which we speak about time is evolving, but it's also getting more vague, which is, you've seen, and I'm sure you've been subjected to this. We don't talk about decades anymore. We talk about generations. Millennials, the Gen Zs, the Gen Xs, the Gen Alphas, you know what I mean?
Was that a stab at my age?
No, it was a stab at mine too, because I'm one of those cusp assholes that like, am I Gen X, or am I an elder millennial? Am I a zillennial? Like, which one do I fit in? Right? I was raised by old people. Can I say that I'm part of the silent generation that was born in the wrong decade? Like, I think that that's going to become more important as time goes on, because our trends, our culture seems like it's being homogenized by how quickly we're moving, but how disposable our memories and our history are. And it's there was a quote, and it really made me like think about how I think about and verbalize the passage of time, right? And how important words are. I know that I use a lot of them, but
nobody can tell.
At least my voice isn't grating, I don't think.
I think the one thing that people are going to pick up from, whether it's your first, our first recordings were 5-6 hours long, or what they record from here, is that when you're passionate about something, you just talk, and you give people everything they need to know about that subject. And that's something I truly appreciate. Being somebody who's extremely busy and would love to have time to read and learn about all these processes, sure. I just call you up and be like, Hey, what about this? And you're
Hey,
like,
professor.
you go, sit down. We got a few hours of talking. And then,
Yeah.
but that saves me from having to try to figure it out on my own in between being a father, working a full-time job, having a full-time after hours gig, So that stuff I think is stuff that people are going to really, they're going to grab onto. And hopefully this episode gets people just so excited about preserving history, not about the next, like you said, not the next banger. It's about even collecting moments now in our current time frame that are going to be something crazy and huge later on. So yeah, man, the excitement that I feel for what you're doing, knowing that eventually this is something people will be able to find, will they'll be able to look at, or the history that you're going to provide to a family. Like, that's such a cool feeling. And I'm only on the outside of it. I'm not the one doing it, but I'm extremely blessed that I got to hear about it and that I got to be a part of it as your friend. Or the school, giving an image to the school and being like, hey, have you seen this? Yeah. The people in charge weren't really around in that generation.
Yep.
So they're going to be like, no, we haven't seen that. And how do you have it? And then the story gets shared. And this all started because you were like, you saw Kodachrome. Yeah. Yep. It's such a cool.
$20. For $20. Right? So this leads me down this thing. I'd like to ask you a question.
Yep.
When you think about the passage of time, do you consider the future in front of you or behind you?
Man, I mean, I would look at that question as being the typical answer as the future being forward. Not that reverse. I see where you're going. I can feel it, but I would never look at the things that I'm doing right now as being the future because it's current. But
yes,
the way your project is working, you're taking stuff which we would look at as past and making it current or future. So I can kind of see the...
No, so you just did a thing.
I did a thing,
You did that thing where you go in the past.
Yeah.
Right? Pointed to behind you.
I did.
But I want to pose a question. When you are looking forward, you have full scope of what you see in front of you, right?
Yeah.
You know that. It is fact. But the future is unknown. You cannot see the future. You don't know what's going to happen. The only time of which we have full and unadulterated actual truth and being able to look at as a whole, as a collective, is the past. And the way that we speak about it in English and our linguistics and stuff, it does that thing where we look at the future as being in front of us, even if we talk about it, our language, our sign language, the way that we point and gesture and everything, I'm walking forward into the future because time is passing forward, right? But it's a point of reference of context that gives us. But there are communities out there that look at the future as being behind us, because to see the future, you actually have to stop and think about it and turn back around to see the thing that you don't know if it's there yet. Whereas the past, we have full view of it. We're able to take all of it in. And I know that sounds kind of like hippie trippy, like, whoa, brother, mushrooms. But it's one of those things that really trips me out a little bit, because the more I think about it, it makes me wonder how we kind of can conceptualize and rethink how we think of stuff, right? Not to bully flat earthers again, but another funny argument that flat earthers will give is like, so you really think that there's somebody in Australia standing upside down right now? Right? And now think about it, because the first reaction is, that's ridiculous. You're stupid. But The answer to that question is yes, from our perspective. Because if we're standing on the North Pole, looking at the Earth from the moon, the person in Australia is actually standing upside down, but they are standing straight up, right? And it leads to this argument from flurfers of this incredulity thing, where because it doesn't make sense to them, they think that it's a lie. And as like, this is a very flimsy like connection, but it really makes me rethink a lot of how I approach the world. It kind of like recenters how I'm able to give empathy and understanding to strangers, because their stories can be so upside down from mine, and like not really taking the time to take myself out of the equation and not center my own understanding in this world helps me be more broadly accepting of kind of everybody that's involved, right? And it gives me a little bit more open mind to like, okay, so how can I separate the curds from the whey, so to speak, right? Because at the end of the day, the truth is always one-sided. The thing that happened. Now, everybody else's versions of it that differ from that, they're like those docudramas that are like based in real events, right? Like, but the truth is one-sided. The truth is biased. It happened a certain way. The reasons that led to it, the things that came of it, the consequences of it, that's also the truth. And those things can be examined, but what actually happened, right? And truth tellers can get accused a lot of being hard-headed, biased, stubborn, this, that, and the other. But it's like, but if you're telling the truth, there's not a both sides to this. There's a both sides to how it may have been experienced. There's a both sides to how it made people feel, right? Who contributed what to the issue. But the thing that occurred. And that's one of the interesting parts of seeing history and photos like this that don't have any context really to them, because they are very one-sided. They are what happened in that moment when that shutter slammed shut. You know what I mean? And being able to like look at that and have it in a tangible form, especially so far separated from it. I don't have an emotional connection to these people. I don't know who they are outside of what I've found out. You know what I mean? I know to some degree the influences that they had that have been written about. I know obituaries. I know condolences that friends and lineages and stuff have given out. But I don't know those people. I only know the truth of what happened in that moment when that photo was taken. And being able to kind of like cobble together the in-between parts and understand the context surrounding that event, like the game, the Baylor game, right? The more you look at it, the more you see. And the more truth you can like wring out of it. I feel like more of us, I think that we could benefit from being able to do that on a regular basis, right? Not only for ourselves, but everyone around us. Because I don't know. We lose so much and tend to get like almost spiral ourselves down paths that make us feel like less important in the grand scheme of things. And especially as photographers and artists and creatives and stuff, I feel bad for those who think that the only worthwhile moments are the ones that are bangers. Because we do not have a good scope, mostly, unless it's just something that's like obvious, right? Like a 9/11 or, you know, that tragedy in DC over the Potomac the other day. Things like that. Our lives and most of what makes us special are inside of our walls and on our streets, and the little like innocuous interactions we have with strangers, and a sunset that stood out among the rest, or a snowstorm, right? That is a generational snowstorm. So like being in Texas, I'm 42 now. I've never seen snow like that in my life, other than when I went to Boston when I was 3. But the only reason why I know about that is because there's a photo of me standing knee deep in snow in Boston with my stupid little beanie on, like, and my little like Beatles haircut. Like, what's this white stuff? Like that sort of thing, right? I don't remember.
I like
that.
your impression of how you would have thought you sounded like when you were 3.
I mean, my voice changed when I was like 5, so like it's not too different. But like I used to freak out all of my elementary teachers when they would call roll on that first day. It's like, Timmy, yeah, like Ansley, like what the fuck?
Sir, this is kindergarten.
Are you fucking Benjamin Button? Get the fuck out of my class, like you tiny big bastard.
Oh man, I love how you just explained that, because it's so true, and how that simple image can tell a story for generations to come.
Dude, I'm telling you, I really can't overstate it. That the discovery of those slides and really delving into them very much shifted the way I think of my own journey in photography. I haven't been on social media since September now or whatever. Like, deleted my Facebook, don't have Instagram, don't have Threads. I haven't posted anything on YouTube, and just put my website live again, right? And to those that only knew my work by Instagram, I am now a ghost. But in that time frame, because I haven't been thinking about posting, I haven't been thinking about editing and cropping and putting it to this and making sure that it's in this aspect ratio and yada blah blah blah. I've taken more photos in the past few months of just regular stuff, my chickens and the snow, and going on photo walks in my neighborhood, and like strangers that consented to their photos being taken because I was out on a snow walk and they saw the camera and did something stupid as a result, because everybody was just like kind of collectively happy because all of us were sharing this generational thing together, from senior citizens that were living in the neighborhood and have been here for 50, 60 years, to parents with their kids that are small enough to go on little like radio flyer sleds. You know what I mean? And like, I'm sure those parents bought that sled going, this is never going to happen. And then it happened that one day, right? And they were like, holy shit, get out the sled. The kid has to do it. Finally. Right. And so I actually texted Lucas that morning. I had taken some photos with the M11, and did the unthinkable and took the non-weather resistant M11 out into the snowstorm that was still snowing, because I was just like, man, this expensive chunk of metal has to do more than in perfect conditions. Let me see if it just explodes on me, right? And it didn't. Hey. And those are some of the photos that you saw clearly, right? That was when it was still snowing and there's snow on like in the frame, right? Like that kind of stuff. And they're cool. But I texted Lucas and I'm like, hey, so Michigander, you have better experience with this than me. You're in a snowstorm and you want to take photos of said snowstorm. Portrait 800, Ektachrome. And he's like, I see why you asked me this. I'm like, yeah. He's like, man, I don't know. I would go with probably Portra 800 because it's a little bit warmer. And I'm like, oh, I forgot. The Ektachrome that I have is the daylight balanced kind that Kodak won't sell to you. And he was like, oh, dude, Ektachrome. And I was like, thank you for confirming where I was leaning.
That is Lucas Vanderlinde, in case anybody is wondering.
Oh, yeah. Vanderlinde, not Vanderlind. Remember to pronounce the E.
Always.
That's important.
Another very, very good friend of the podcast and myself.
Yeah. And on that 3.5 mile walk in the snow, I blew through that a whole roll. One lens, one camera. I slapped the 35, the Summicron on the M6 and just went out. Whatever. People were sitting there like talking to me, like I was having interactions with folks, with their kids, with, out in the park, and like, just because everybody was out, they're just like, they didn't care that it was cold. They didn't care that it was snowing. All of us were all like slipping and almost falling and stuff. Cause like, we don't have snowshoes. We don't understand how to deal with ice in Texas. It's not like we have infrastructure or like road salting. You know what I mean? Like it just sort of happens and we're like all running our water so our pipes don't pop because Texas isn't built for that sort of thing, right? I haven't even developed them yet. But I think I'm going to purposely wait like 6 to 8 months. I'm going to wait until I feel bad. And then I'm going to get them developed. Because if there's one thing that I've found that's cool about shooting film, is that delaying seeing what you captured in happy moments can be one of the brightest things that you can do to bring you out of the dark ones.
Yes, sir.
And there's just a different, I don't know, digital, it's fine. Like, you have the history or the recording of the event that happened in the way that it happened, and you have it right there, and you can show your friends and your family and all that kind of stuff. But like, I almost kind of feel like the slide film thing is much more of a personal endeavor. Like I'm almost kind of looking at it as my own like insurance policy against feeling like a shit, like having a shit day. You know what I mean? Thankfully I've got like a local lab that'll develop E6. And now that I can scan my own stuff, it's $12 to get that roll developed. Right. But dude, $12 in a really dark day when I'm feeling like crappy about myself or the situation in the world or whatever, like being able to go and support a small business right here in town with $12 and then remember that once in a lifetime thing that happened that day with like smiling, joyous people and everybody kind of on the same page. Dude, $22. I think I paid $10 for that roll, right? So $22. And I don't even have to scan it. I could stick them in little slide mounts that I have a ton of extra ones at this point and just look at them and go, whoa, nice. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There's something really neat about that. And I don't think that I fully appreciated the magic nature of that feeling until I removed myself from the expectation that everything needs to be shared. And I don't know that I would have come to that realization organically without that Kodachrome discovery. Like, it's really hard to overstate how differently that made me think about my own process and what reality is and how it looks. And like, some of the most important photos that ever get taken are not good, right? They're subpar at best in an objective manner of exposure and shutter speed and color and all this kind of stuff. But the things that are contained therein are monumental to the right people. And if I'm being true to myself, like the reason why I started photos or taking photos, like we talked about before, was to document my dogs. And somewhere along the way, I got kind of like wrapped up in, well, now I need to get better and I need to know this and I need to learn how this lighting does this and all this kind of stuff, right? And it almost like it takes away, it's that robber of joy that can happen when you take not only yourself too seriously, but a craft too seriously in what you actually expect it to be the end result thereof. Like if you were thinking too much about the flavor of the pie that you're baking, a lot of the time the pie is going to suck because you're missing a lot of the process and like the small pieces, you know, that lead up to that great cooking or that great baking. You know, why is grandma's food so great? Like they didn't have digital scales. They didn't think about that stuff. When they're baking bread, they're like, they've got flour, they've got yeast, and they've got water. And they're looking at how those ingredients act with each other. They have a tangible feel to how the dough sticks or doesn't to their fingers. And they know by that how moist the dough needs to be. That's how they learned how to bake bread. So if everything ended, I can bake bread, or they could bake bread because they could find flour, they could find water, and they could make yeast. You burn some trees and make bread. You know, I find a whole lot more joy in creative endeavors in that discovery. Because it kind of brings me back to being that like curious kid that saw a dinosaur and related it to the lizard that I saw on my back fence. You know what I mean? And then tried to figure out how those two things were linked. That curiosity that kicks off the journey of figuring that out and learning and enriching our lives with understanding more of the world around us and rethinking a lot of the times the biases and the things that we've come to know as being normal. You know? I don't know, dude. I wish that I don't wish, but I do wish. I don't wish for a very selfish reason, but I wish for the non-selfish reason that like when I showed up in an estate sale, the things that people were clamoring for were those slides. It sucks that the proprietors are like, oh, nobody wants those. I can never sell them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, like, is history only worthwhile if you knew about it from the news? And that seems like it almost kind of seems like really reductive. Like I said, I know a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about like sounds like really hippie trippy and, you know, like Noam Chomsky like shot me out one day. Like this like really diluted version of philosophical ponderances or whatever. But I don't know, dude. I just, we can't consume our way out of crises. And I don't think that we truly, like, I think losing empathy for each other and stuff as a society and losing the understanding, like, it does us all a disservice. Dave has that project that he's doing for that book. Was it titled What We Lost? The Northern Plains thing. And there's that story of that Santa Claus looking dude that's like the last resident of that town, right? And I remember when he first kind of told me about the project and what he was working, and he let me see some of his initial like sequencing galleries and stuff. And he's explaining, you know, we got on a Zoom call and we're talking about it and stuff, and I'm just like, I go, what you're doing is what politicians won't do. You're listening to voices that everybody's forgotten about because they don't make economic sense to listen to. And the only thing that happens when people get ignored like that, especially when it makes them like when it's killing everything about their livelihood that they ever grew to understand as whole and meaningful, it will make them bitter and vengeful and hateful. And they look for, like, because humans look for a reason for suffering, you know? And, you know, even the way that they're talked about, the flyover states and this, that, and the other. And it's just like, you want to look at why we have these like vast divides and turmoil and tumultuous relations and breaking down of relations and stuff, is because we don't listen to each other. Like, we're very quick to throw our own suffering at someone else and blame them for it. And like we talked about before, there's a field full of grain behind a barbed wire fence that none of us have a key to. And yet the grain that we have amongst ourselves will blame each other for being the one that's withholding that particulate of grain, rather than all cumulatively turning our eyes to, like, who owns that field? Why are they okay? Why are our systems set up to be okay with that? Something like that, exploring the desolate towns and the desert decay and reliving history through mundane moments. I think that's kind of where the hack to all this is. Not to like prop myself up or whatever. And again, it could 100% be because I didn't have like a cool, happy family and stuff. So there's that, like, oh, I wonder what it was like, you know, in that same vein of like, this is what it was like. And this isn't a Disney movie. This wasn't like produced. This, like, clearly these weren't staged shots, because people are just like in all different various states of like whatever, you know. They were just moments in time that happened between family and friends that were doing big things in a really earth-shatteringly different time period than we're in. Like, and it's all there. It's not behind some like gigantic paywall. It's not something that, you know, we have to get a subscription to. You know, all this stuff is there. It's in boxes, and it's in like carousel slide holders, and it's in shoe boxes and stuff. And they're in grandparents' houses, and they're in parents' houses because they've been passed down. And we're just sort of like, you can't even sell them. You know, you see those carousel boxes at like the local camera stores, like there's stacks of them. It's like, name your price. Jesus Christ. You know, like,
yeah.
Wild
like
to me. It's
man.
just very cool. And I hope, you know, I'll say this. I don't know that the family member that I found will even be receptive to it. I imagine that when that cold email goes out after I've like at least kind of pieced together, you know, enough of it that it makes sense and it's also good, like the solid photos, right? I would assume that their first reaction, especially knowing like, what does he want from me? Right. And who knows? Because if I'm being equally objective about it, there could be stuff of that family like they didn't actually like each other. We were like, those slides have the happy moments and do nothing for the dark ones, right? So maybe there's a reason why that slide box got left behind. Maybe it was on purpose, and the reaction to that is going to be negative from that family member that's left over. It's definitely like some anxiety or hesitation, trepidation there on my end. But if not, and if these are things that they just didn't realize because they didn't know enough about that process to see it and to appreciate it, worth it. Worth the awkwardness and worth the risk, you know? I don't know.
I think what you're doing is amazing, man. I really do.
It's cool. And honestly, best case scenario, like one of the things I'm going to offer them is like, hey, I got this box and I did this. I digitized all these. If y'all know of or have any more, I will digitize all of them for free for you. And I'll put them on a thing. And if you want me to do prints for you, I can do those. Like, I'll do whatever the fuck, because my curiosity is like peaked at this point, and I'm trying to like hungry hippo all of the Kodachrome slides that I can find, to really understand what that film stock did and how it survived and all of its here, there, and other wares. But if I'm that one person that like they didn't know how to reach out, or they didn't know how to make that step and make those tiny little 35 millimeter slides, big boy slides, dude, I don't want any compensation for it. Y'all being stoked about seeing stuff that y'all haven't seen in, 60 years or whatever, like being able to remember or see the pictures of your oldest. And I mean, because who I would be reaching out to is the youngest and only surviving child of that, right? Of John and Liz. Like, this is your old sister, She went on to champion women's rights. She went on to be a really fierce, like the term I kept on hearing people use in the condolence letters on her obituary was that she was a lion for advocacy for those that were around her. She didn't fight for herself. She fought for the betterment of those that were surrounding her. Robert, who was the doctor who died in the charity run, same stuff. He became a physician. He became a cardiologist, but he loved art so much that he took himself out of Texas, moved to California, and then ended up in Oregon. Where he died was at a charity run in Oregon in 2014. I don't know, dude. That kind of stuff is really neat to me. I don't know that it's definitely not like altruistic so much, because it's definitely like painting with a brighter brush on kind of a dark time in society. But I do think that it kind of outlines, again, being fair to the historical time periods that these photos come from and the collections that I'm looking for from, like there's another in that same group with the Dean Corll thing. Like, clearly Dean Corll is a bad fucking dude. His accomplices were bad fucking dudes. And there's a whole lot of trepidation specifically about those photos. I don't think that I'm going to be as aggressive about putting them out there, because I feel like it could be insensitive to existing family members, right? Because if my mom had been in one of Dean Corll's like catch houses, it is very arguable that there are still parents that are alive that lost kids. And I don't want to be like, ooh, look at this thing that I found, right? In that same collection, there's a photo of, I assume that it's here at Ellington Field, which is like the military air base thing. So like when the presidents come in, anybody of the like Air Force One, that's where they always land, right? Is at Ellington Field. There's a photo in there on, pretty sure it's Ectochrome, of LBJ getting into the 70s or the 60s version of the Beast, that limo, that bulletproof limo, like leaning down, getting into the limo with Air Force One in the background. Clear as fucking day. And it's not a pink slide. It's a really well preserved one. It's a candid moment of, like, I'm not an LBJ fan, right? I'm definitely one of those people that, looking back on JFK and his assassination, I feel that was a very bad turning point in our history, right? And LBJ taking over, especially understanding why he was the vice president at the time, like, it puts a lot of context into that photo for me. But it also kind of like, we're still arguing about the same stuff. You know what I mean? Like, is it really dark now, or are we just along a very slow timeline that has always moved slowly, and humanity hasn't been here long enough to be able to view it as moving swiftly, you know? And it's not from people that nobody would ever know. They're not from, the McMurrays or the Vivian Myers. And, to that point, we would have never known who Vivian Meyer was if some dude didn't stumble upon her photos and go, I wonder what's on here. Like, the curiosity and the history and all that kind of stuff, it's this crazy cool gold mine, and it's right there if you just kind of like look sometimes,
Yep.
I don't know. I think it's neat. It's a really neat study for me in, it's not a dino footprint in sandstone or something, but it's somewhere in the realm. Like,
Yeah.
if those film slides can outlast an entire big ass concrete stadium, like maybe Kodak needs to take their heads out of their asses and start producing more film for more. Like, maybe there needs to be a film renaissance. Maybe there needs to be a tangible art renaissance where everything that we're doing doesn't need to be contained on hard drives, that are subjected to all kinds of like, well, I mean, if this goes down or if this happens, like, what else? What do we have? Yeah, I don't know.
So
Spiel.
are these images that you are doing, are they going to be able to be seen on your site at some point?
Yes, I'm very close to that. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, I just republished my site. I've been kind of working through revamping it in my like on the back end so nobody sees it, so I can kind of like play with iteration cycles on my own time, see how I feel about it. It also made me really rethink why I had a website and what I was going to do with it. So if anybody that was listening went to it before and felt like it was too deep, what you're likely going to find now is that it's going to be very stripped down and pared down to like my landing page, a gallery of probably rotating images based on how I vibe with them on a particular day when I open it up. I'm going to post about this Kodachrome thing exclusively, I think, on my blog part. And that's about it. I think anything that I have on my gallery, because I started printing my own work too, which has been righteous, but also eye-opening too. It's just another layer in that, like, oh, you thought you were selective before, transfer pixel to paper and see how you think about that photo now. Anything that I have on my gallery, I think I'm going to offer as a print. So whether or not those become limited editions because I don't vibe with something anymore is to be seen. But I'm not going to do anything monetary with any of the slides. I want to post about those stories. I want to put it out there so that if anybody from the family happens to Google search and gets a hit and comes to my site, maybe they have a cool surprise that day. Right. And I'm not going to print any of that stuff because I'm not the photographer. So unless the family stumbles on it and asks me for it, it's going to live in that little thing. For the longest time, people have been telling me that I need to like get on the YouTube train, and I hate being on camera. So like, that's weird, but I think I'm going to try to piggyback the revamped site and the blog with YouTube. I think that's going to be how I do it. So my concept right now is I'll probably go down two avenues of teaching the me's of the world, if any of them still exist, of what it's been like to learn how to print my own stuff. And then as I hoard and amass more of the Kodachrome collections, I think I'm going to try to do like a series of that specifically on YouTube, which will be mirrored in the blog. That's where, if you want the more condensed, me not rambling side and seeing me write about something and be able to see the images, I think that's where I'm going to do it. But it's going to be a much more stripped down website than it was. I'm not going to offer like presets or courses or any of that kind of stuff. It just, I don't know, it makes me feel kind of sleazy. So I would rather have an outlet where if someone wants to ask me a question, I can answer it honestly. So the only thing that's kind of stepping out of my like comfort zone really, other than the YouTube thing, is I am going to start a newsletter. And so anytime I post a blog thing, there'll be a newsletter thing to accompany it.
That's a good idea.
I am not a spammy person. So if anybody listening to this is like, you're just getting me. No, that is not me. You ask any of my real estate clients how many times they've ever gotten a cold email from me going, "Hey, it's Ansley, your favorite realtor." And they'll be like, "Man, dude, I never heard anything from him. I asked him a question. He answered it. He fixed a problem. And here and there, he'll offer me a pie." And like, like around the holidays. And every once in a while, if he's in the area, he'll bring eggs for free. But other than that, like, I'm just not a cold call-y, spammy type of person. You mentioned it earlier. I like answering inquiries and questions as thoroughly as I can. But if you don't ask it, how often do I text?
Not very. But we were saying, like, before we got on, we can go months. And it's like, you know, I get a text from you, you get a text from me, and it's like I'm talking to my brother again. And it's
likewise.
It means if everything went away tomorrow, photography wise,
today, Junior,
right? I would still have my friend, and that's become so much more important to me. I still view social media as a necessary evil for my podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm also following the same sort of train where more of my personal work, the stuff that means the most to me, is going to be moved to a website. Mm-hmm. Whether people want to go there and look at it or not, doesn't matter, because it's there. Mm-hmm. It's there for me. I'm also trying to take images that I really, really enjoy and save them on 4x6 or 5x7, just print it out of my little printer at home, keep them, put them in old school photo books. So those memories are here for people.
Little portfolio boxes and stuff.
Exactly.
You know?
Yep. Well, I think this is probably a great place for us to call this one.
For sure.
What is the website where people can start to connect with you here in the next little bit?
It's just going to be my name, just Ansley, AnsleyStewart.com. So AnsleyStewart.com.
Fantastic. All right, brother. Love you, man. And I look forward to getting this one out, and all our fun future conversations. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Same to you, dude. I'm glad that you're feeling better too, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
It's good to have you around.
Some people are great, happy that I'm still here. Others are like, man, I can give or take that guy. He's kind of a jerk sometimes, but that's just my kids and my wife.
You're I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, brother.
Thank you again. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Life of Phys Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed our show, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content and the stories of our incredible guests. And remember to stay connected with us on all social media platforms. It's at LIFE_OF_PHYS, or on the internet at www.lifeofphys.com. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.